The Hawkeyes are off the bye week and they're headed to Ann Arbor to take on Michigan. This is Incompetent Sports Talk. Welcome to Incompetent Sports Talk, along with Mike Raven and Jake Burgers. I'm Alex Salzma. Iowa had the week off last week, so we can't really talk about the Iowa game. So we're going to go into the SEC, probably the premier conference in college football, and we're going to give you our power rankings. So we're going to take, as of right now, who you think are the top 5 teams in that conference. And I'll start with mine. I'm going to put Arkansas at number 5. The thing I like about Arkansas is the fact that they got a great quarterback in Ryan Mallett, probably one of the best in the SEC. Also, their defense is getting slightly better. They'll move up in mine if they can beat Auburn this Saturday. An interesting fact about them, too, is they've only trailed in 8 minutes and 48 seconds of game time this entire year. Now, the competition will increase as they get through the schedule, but I put them here because of the way they played Alabama, nearly beating them at home, and the fact that I think their offense is pretty explosive. I put them at number 5. Number 4, LSU, and I know they're unbeaten, but they just don't pass the eye test for me right now, LSU. They haven't played what I consider to be the 3 best teams in the SEC yet, even though they are 4-0 in the SEC, and you'll find out what my top 3 teams in the SEC are. They do, though, lead the SEC in total defense and in rush defense, and they're in the top 10 in the country in 5 defensive categories. They're finding ways to win. They've won their last 2 games on their final possession of the game, so if they just keep finding ways to win, the whole power ranking thing and the whole national ranking thing will work themselves out. So I have LSU at number 4. Number 3, Alabama. Even though they did lose to South Carolina, I still think they're a very good football team. They beat down Florida in Tuscaloosa, and then they also beat Arkansas on the road in Fayetteville. So I still think those are really good wins. I still think this team probably will still win the SEC, even though they did have a loss. Just keep in mind they've won 19 of the last 20 SEC games, and they still got a great football team. Number 2, South Carolina, and what an impressive win that they had versus Alabama, snapping that winning streak that I just mentioned. Alabama lost by 2 touchdowns to South Carolina. They gave up 35 points. That's unreal. I mean, this is Alabama we're talking about. So South Carolina, Steve Spurrier finally gets a big win. First time that South Carolina has ever beaten a number 1 ranked team in football. They lead the SEC in red zone offense, scoring touchdowns in 17 of their 20 trips into the red zone. Very efficient in that regard. They also lead the league in red zone defense. They've only allowed 5 touchdowns in their opponent's 20 trips to the red zone. So they're doing really good things. Steven Garcia probably had the game of his life versus Alabama. If he can play as good as he did in that game, throwing 3 touchdowns and only threw 3 incompletions, then SEC is going to be a contender to go to the SEC title game. Number 1, Auburn. Great win versus South Carolina. Great win versus Clemson, where they just found a way to come back and win that game in overtime. They're ranked 8th nationally in rush offense and 10th in total offense. People knock their defense, but when it comes to crunch time in the 4th quarter, Auburn has only allowed 13 points in overtime and in the 4th quarter. So when it comes to clutch time, Alabama's defense comes through, and they've only given up 3 points on defense in their 3 SEC games. Auburn, they get it done on offense, but they just find a way in the 4th quarter and in overtime to get it done on defense. So I like Auburn. 5 teams in the SEC are ranked in the top 12 in the polls. Mike, what are your power rankings?
See, this is what makes the rankings so difficult, these power rankings, because all of these teams could line up and beat one another, I think, on a given Saturday, because there's so much talent. The coaching is so tremendous in all of these programs. At number 5, I'm going to go with Arkansas. I'm going to agree with you. Ryan Mallett, a tremendous quarterback. We obviously talked about last weekend with our fantasy picks. Arkansas's tremendous wide receiving core. They throw the ball for over 300 yards every game, so I like Arkansas at 5. And they gave Alabama a good run for their money. At 4, I have Alabama, so we have a little difference. It's one of those things, my philosophy here is this is a snapshot in time. I think Alabama, by the end of the year, will probably be right at the top of the SEC West. possibly playing for a championship of the SEC. But right now, I got to put them at 4. Number 3, I'm going to go with South Carolina because they beat Alabama so impressively at home and for all the reasons all the statistics you gave. But Auburn at 2 because they beat South Carolina. Auburn not winning pretty. An ugly win against a bad Kentucky team, but finding a way to win nonetheless, getting the job done. I think their defense in the long run is going to hurt them as they face some of these other teams in the West. And then number 1, LSU. Now LSU, the Mad Hatter, Les Miles, it's not pretty, it's ugly, but he finds a way again to get it done, to go into Florida and get a big win late in the game, taking some risks. Have LSU at number 1 for now. I think they've found a decent mixture with Jared Lee and Jordan Jefferson at quarterback to manage the football game, and the defense, kind of like at Iowa, puts LSU in a position to win every football game. So that's my list, a little different, but all these teams are so evenly matched, and there's a lot of parity in the SEC West in particular.
Jake, before we debate our list, give us your top 5.
Well, I went a little different route than you guys did. Mike went with a snapshot in time, basically going with where the standings are right now. I'm going with who I think will be there at the end. That's why at number 5 I have Auburn. Auburn's 6-0, 3-0 in conference. They've looked very good so far, but they have won 3 games by 3 points each. They did beat South Carolina, but they did so because South Carolina turned the ball over 4 times. Cam Newton's an electrifying quarterback. He really is. But their defense is right around average in the SEC. I'm not sure they have what it takes to be there at the end of the season, so that's why I have them at number 5. Number 4, I'm going with Arkansas. I was really impressed with their game against Alabama. Their offense is very explosive. Ryan Mallett is leading the country in passing yards per game. Just a very explosive offense. They had an explosive offense last year. What they didn't have last year was a defense. This year they do have a defense. They're second in the SEC in scoring defense, so that's why I have them at number 4. Number 3, I'm going with South Carolina. South Carolina, everyone knows, had a great upset against Alabama. They played great in that game, notably Steven Garcia had the game of his life, as Alex said. Another guy to look out for with South Carolina is Jeffrey, their wide receiver. Not a lot of people knew who he was going into the Alabama game. He had a huge game. He's averaging over 100 receiving yards per game. South Carolina's defense came up big against Alabama, who has a lot of talent on offense. I have South Carolina at 3. Number 2, I'm going with LSU. They're 6-0 overall, 4-0 already in the SEC. They haven't played the top 3 teams yet, but so far they haven't played a non-BCS team. So that's what makes their 6-0 record really impressive right now. They got a little more production out of their quarterbacks against Florida with Jarrett Lee and Jordan Jefferson splitting some time. Their offense is still a little stagnant. They need to move the ball more consistently, but their defense is right at the top of the SEC. Number 1, I'm not jumping off the bandwagon yet. Alabama is going to be the team to beat in the SEC throughout the season. They did lose to South Carolina, but they will bounce back. McElroy, Ingram, Julio Jones, they're going to lead that offense. Their defense had a terrible game against South Carolina, but they still rank as the 5th best scoring defense in the country. Alabama is still the best team in the SEC, and that's why they will be there at the end of the season.
I'm interested to see how Julio Jones bounces back. He got injured in that South Carolina game, and if he's not there down the road, it'll be interesting to see how well they can do because Mark Ingram held to 88 yards in the last 2 games, I believe. So against better defenses, Ingram hasn't looked as impressive so far.
Yeah, I think it's still going to be Alabama-Florida in the SEC title game. I think Florida beats South Carolina. The East isn't that strong. The West is where it's all happening right now. If you just look at our rankings, look at how prevalent the West is in these rankings. Do you guys still think Alabama, Florida, SEC title game?
Well, I definitely think Alabama is going to be there. That's why I have them number 1 in my power rankings. You guys had them a little lower, but I think we are in agreement that Alabama will be the team to beat at the end of the season. As for Florida over South Carolina, that's much more difficult to predict in my opinion. South Carolina looked great against Alabama. That was not a fluke win. They hung tough with Alabama. They took Alabama's punches when they came. They rolled with them. They showed a lot of poise. Steve Spurrier is a heck of a ball coach. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he does against Florida coming up here. I think South Carolina is going to make it to the title game, and I think we'll get to see a rematch between Alabama and South Carolina.
I put South Carolina number 2 because I think they've earned what they've done this year. I mean, with the win versus Alabama, a very good win, but can they win on the road? That's the question I have. South Carolina has struggled in SEC road games under Spurrier, so that's what I want to find out. I just want to know if they can win some big games on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think Florida's also going to get back get back to the SEC title game. I mean, the SEC East is such a weak division. Georgia with a huge win over Tennessee, big for their program, but Georgia far from impressive this season. Tennessee, who Florida already beat, has been pretty bad. Vanderbilt, nothing impressive. Kentucky, who Florida already beat, not very good either. I mean, it's just one of those divisions that you just got to wonder. I think it'll come down to South Carolina and Florida, and Florida's going to get the job done against South Carolina. I don't think Spurrier's going to go and get a win there.
Yeah, and how about Tennessee? The amazing thing to me is I think you can make the argument that Tennessee's been the least impressive team in the SEC, and the fact that they haven't won an SEC game. And at least Vanderbilt, they went to Oxford and they beat Mississippi State by 14. Mississippi by 14 points. Mississippi State right now is 4-2. I mean, they're not looking that bad this week. They got to play Florida. I'm sure Florida wins that game, but Tennessee, look how far that program has fallen.
I agree. It's fascinating after coming off such an emotional loss, a tough loss against LSU down in Baton Rouge. I think that we saw a little hangover as they played Georgia. Now, Georgia might have been, clearly was the better football team, but Tennessee probably should have played a little bit better, but I think they're just reeling emotionally after that tough loss.
Let's go to the Big Ten now. We're going to rank our top 5 Big Ten schools. And just because I had to pick a number 5, I want to put Michigan there. I don't think they're going to be there towards the end of the year. That defense, finally, they had to play a legitimate defense. Their defense is the worst in the Big Ten. Maybe Indiana's might be worse, but Michigan, it'll be interesting to see what they do when they have to start playing some good Big Ten teams. We saw what happened last week when they played Michigan State, a 34-17 loss. I think Iowa beats them this weekend. I think Ohio State beats them. And so Michigan, I don't know how long they'll be at 5, but as of right now, they're still at 5 because I needed a team to put there. I almost put Illinois at 5, but I just can't fathom a Ron Zook team being number 5, so I had to put Michigan there. Number 4, Wisconsin. I still think they're a good team, but they just haven't proven it yet. They haven't really had the opportunities to prove it yet. This Saturday they take on Ohio State, so maybe they can do it there. That double-digit loss at Michigan State really hurts because other than that, they haven't really looked all that impressive versus their competition. Granted, they did beat the heck out of Austin Peay. They did smash Minnesota, but Minnesota is probably the worst team in the Big Ten. I really want to see what they do this weekend versus Ohio State, and then again when they have to play come to Kinnick Stadium and play Iowa the week after that. Number 3, Iowa. I actually think Iowa is a better team than Michigan State, but the fact of the matter is that Iowa hasn't really had a lot of signature wins yet. The Penn State win doesn't look as good anymore since they got killed by Alabama and because they got killed at home 33-13 by Illinois and Ron Zook. And you take a look at number 2, Michigan State. Michigan State is coming off back-to-back wins versus ranked teams, beating a ranked Wisconsin team by double digits at home, and then going on the road to Ann Arbor and beating a ranked Michigan team by double digits. Michigan State may be the surprise of the Big Ten, and they're really going to be a factor down the stretch because they don't have to play Ohio State, their biggest game, at Kinnick against Iowa in the end of the month. That ought to be an exciting game. And number 1, Ohio State. Really, their defense, one of the best in college football. They rank in the top 10 in most defensive statistical categories, and they average over 40 points a game. Ohio State, clearly the best team in this conference. But what really will be interesting, 2, 3, and 4, that battle that goes on there, where those teams are going to end up when it's all said and done. Jake, give me your top 5.